Nick Cush. We are doing a little fun thing here on the MovieBabble Podcast this time around where we are covering the Fantasia Film Festival, and I'm here with my good buddy, Sean Coates. How you doing, man?
G'day. How are you going? As I am Australian, I have to emphasize my Australianness as much as I possibly can, especially for your podcast feed. And also, I know even though guys like Blake and James and Kyle have joined the MovieBabble staff, I am the unofficial and self-appointed Australian correspondent of MovieBabble. And thank you to Fantasia for actually allowing international press to cover this festival. What's the word I'm looking for? One of the upsides of a virtual festival.
Yeah, you are my unofficial/official Australian correspondent. I give you that credit as well. Yeah, that is interesting because it is one of those things where we're all like locked down and everything like that. And one of the few things, I guess, that is a positive in all of this is that we do have the chance to cover the Fantasia Film Festival for a change and not have to be in person in all these screenings, which is really cool because I know we both saw a lot of really interesting films through all of this.
Yeah, exactly. And the same thing happened in my lovely city of Melbourne. The same thing happened here for the Melbourne International Film Festival, which we did cover on the site as well. But like having, especially Melbourne for international and mostly American listeners that don't know, my city of Melbourne and the state of Victoria, actually here in Australia, have been under a 6-week lockdown of stage 4. So it's basically we can't leave 5 kilometers from our house. We can only go outside for 4 reasons, which is exercise, going to the supermarket. Like literally everything except for supermarkets are closed right now, pretty much. And yeah, and we're 4 weeks into that. And but things are starting to go down. Our cases have gone down dramatically, and yeah, things are good. But not going to MIF this year really did hurt. But then getting to cover it for the site was a consolation there. But now we get to cover Fantasia, and we saw some really, really cool films. I saw 10. Nick, how many did you watch?
I ended up watching 6, and I'm also just really jealous of the fact that you guys are doing smart things about the virus. But that's just a whole entirely different podcast. But yeah, I saw 6 films. I'm hoping to see a few more before the festival ends on the 2nd, and hopefully we'll get this podcast up before the festival ends. But with Fantasia, I mean, this is my first experience with the festival, but you always hear there's just a lot of really interesting films to watch, a lot of different things, a lot of things that are very off the wall. And I feel like I definitely got that experience, and I feel like you did as well.
Yeah, I think Fantasia occupies this very strange space, I think, within, and like most genre festivals do, where the films are either very specific or just completely like undescribable. Like that's how I feel like with most festivals. Like a lot of the films we'll talk about today, they're like, oh, you expect that from a genre festival, but then there's other films where you're like, what the hell is this? I don't know what it is, but I'm intrigued. And then you watch it and you're like, I don't really know what happened, but I think I loved it.
Yeah, definitely. There's a few where it was like, we'll get into it in a second, where there was one where this backfired on me, but I looked at the title, I looked at the title of the movie and I was like, this sounds interesting, and it wasn't. So we'll get into that. But to break all this down for you, we have a few categories that we're going to go through here to cover, just to break down some of the films that we watched and make it a little fun. So the first category we have here is the worst film. We're going to get this out of the way. So Sean, what was the worst or some of the worst films that you saw at Fantasia?
Well, I think I was pretty lucky, or like had the foresight with my selections to pick movies that I thought would at least be interesting. Like I think a lot of all the films I watched, even the quote worst films that I watched, I wouldn't necessarily call bad. I would just say that they were just like unfortunate like misfires for some of them. Like first of all, Crazy Samurai Musashi, which I have a review for up on the site. It's about Miyamoto Musashi, who is like this legendary Japanese philosopher and swordsman. Like he was in over 60 duels in his life in the early Edo period of Japan. And this film is like not sort of just like a hagiographic retelling of his story that you've seen in like many other films. Like, you know, like his story has basically been the basis for many, many samurai films, especially from a samurai film trilogy actually in the 1950s, where the legendary Toshiro Mifune played Musashi. But this film is definitely more action-oriented, and because the whole film, not the whole film, sorry, but there is a 77-minute single take where it's just Musashi just one by one hacking and slashing his way through a bunch of faceless I think that the total number is 588, but the marketing is selling it short by saying it's only 400, which is weird. But
That's weird.
yeah, so it's a great idea on paper and actually really quite ambitious. Only problem is after maybe 10 minutes or so, it gets really repetitive and quite tiresome, unfortunately. Like it does, like especially when it's like in these really open fields and like it's a traditional samurai fighting style. It's very based in honor, and especially when they only attack one by one, it gets
Right.
yeah.
Yeah.
There's little room for variation, but it actually, when the film actually when Musashi is actually like pitted in a corner, like in like a confined space with like very few, with only like 3 or 4 opponents, like that's when it gets really exciting and really tense. But like that's really few and far between, and especially when there's an epilogue, like after the unbroken take ends, there's a great little like sort of like coda where he fights basically the survivors or like the descendants of, or like he fights other people, and it's shot and edited more traditionally, and it was the best action scene of the movie, and it made me, as like sort of audacious as like this concept was, it was just kind of felt unnecessary in a way, and that was a bit disappointing.
That is a bummer. I feel like in your review, didn't you talk about how it seemed like they had like a lot of maybe issues that were out of their hands, like the sun was always beating down on the
Yes.
shots and things like that. Yeah.
Yeah, it was, I guess because they wanted to film it like at sunset. So the first sort of like half an hour of the single take is like right as the sun is starting to set. But it's really awkward because you can tell that they are trying to keep all of the action facing away from the sun and keep the cameraman
Oh,
facing
jeez.
away from the sun. So it's really awkward. And also, Tak Sakaguchi, who's like this legendary sort of action star who kind of came out of retirement a few years ago for the director's previous film, and also came in and played Musashi in this film. Like he has a really intense physicality to his role, and like you really like it. You're almost like vicariously kind of like the film in of itself is kind of like the endurance test that Musashi is going through. Like you start to feel his exhaustion at a certain point. But yeah, you can tell that like once the sun actually starts to set and there's like no like really visible sort of rays of sunlight, that's when like, you know, like the camera starts to move around a little bit more freely, you know, it starts to get more exciting, and it's just, yeah, it was an odd decision, and it just made the first part of the film really awkward.
That's too bad. It sounds like it was kind of an interesting but ultimately not great experiment, whereas
Yeah.
my movie just wasn't great. My film that I chose for the worst is The Traveling Cat Chronicles, which was the movie I alluded to earlier, where I saw the title and I was like, ooh, Traveling Cat Chronicles, what could this be? And I figured, like, we're going to talk about other crazy movies later in this podcast, where it was like there's so many things off the wall, and I was like, is this like some crazy like cat through time thing? I knew nothing about this movie and I probably should have done my research. But so this movie, more than anything else, I would compare it to more of the movies we've seen stateside, where it's like A Dog's Purpose or A Dog's Journey or A Dog's Way Home, many of the Dogs blank movies.
No cats getting drowned in this film?
Luckily, no. Thank God.
Thank God.
There is no. That's the one thing I will say with this movie. There is no animal like killing. There was in the prologue of this movie. You think there is, and then I was like, oh no, it's going to be that kind of movie. But luckily, there's not. The cat is saved. So basically, the idea of this movie is there's a young adult. He can't take care of his cat anymore for reasons that you'll learn later on that are supposed to make you cry, but did not make me cry. But he can't hold on to this cat any longer, and basically he's just driving from person to person, reconnecting with like his childhood friend or this girl he had a crush on and everything like that. And he's like, they offered to take his cat, and so while they're there, the movie takes the opportunity to kind of recollect on their lives together, and they talk about how he meets his childhood friend, and they had another cat who they really liked together, but their parents wouldn't let them keep them, and they go on this whole thing. So it's a movie that's told in a lot of flashbacks. But it's incredibly repetitive. So this is the cycle of this movie is a guy walks up, meets his friend. They talk about one of their deepest memories together. They laugh, they cry, and then they're like, oh, for whatever reason, they can't keep the cat. Like, sorry, it's not going to work. Like, one person has a dog, and the dog and the cat are like hostile towards each other. So it's like, oh, well, we can't do this now. Obviously, it's not going to work. So then they move on to the next person. So it's just basically that for the entire movie. And it's super schmaltzy. I mean, there's explaining why kind of gets into the spoilers of the movie, but it is just very maudlin, very melodramatic. It just didn't work on me. I think there's definitely an audience for that out there, but it's not me. So yeah, this movie, it was the first movie I watched for Fantasia, so it wasn't the greatest way to start this, but yeah, I should have done my research, but still, the Traveling Cat Chronicles, amazing title. Not a great movie.
Yeah, it didn't really make a great impression on you. It's odd. It doesn't really sound like from what we've come to know of Fantasia from the rest of the films we watched. It doesn't really. It seems like a bit of an outlier in the rest of their programming.
Yeah, it does. And so like there's the cat talks, and luckily it's not a CGI cat like something you'd see at a like show dogs or like anything where like they have like the animated dog just like flying around everywhere and things like that.
Is it like early 2000s kids movies where they animate the mouth moving?
No, there's nothing of that
cat?
either.
No, okay.
So it's literally just like you see the cat's just like looking like a cat, and then there's like someone talking. But it's one of those things where like the people don't understand the cat, so it's really just like the cat's talking to the audience, kind of thing to fill in some gaps. But yeah, this movie was weird. I thought it was going to be a lot more than when it was, and it ended up being very like kind of the most like base level of what you think. It's literally the traveling cat, and they're chronicling it.
Well, it sounds like we both of our least favorite films were both Japanese films with great titles. But another film, because I don't think there's anywhere else we're going to talk about it. It was one of my least favorite of the festival, but like I still think there's some value in it, and a lot of people have really loved this film. And well, it's not really a film because the first credit you see in this is director Ryan Kruger, and it's a Ryan Kruger thing. This isn't a movie. This is a thing. So this is Fried Barry.
I love it. I love thing energy. It's great.
This is Fried Barry. Apparently this is adapted from like a short film, which I watched afterwards. And the short film is basically just like this really disgusting sort of like homeless looking drug addict, like sort of like spazzing around, and like he's clearly high, like fried. He's on something. He's on ecstasy. He's on something. And like, he's just like contorting his body in like really weird ways. This movie it's something like 4 minutes long. It's pretty cool. And the camera's doing some really interesting things. That was really cool. And it's interesting because one of my biggest issues with this film is that this should have been a short film. But like the concept that they expand would have made a better short film. But yeah, so basically this takes this short, and so it's set in South Africa, set in Cape Town specifically. And there's this guy named Barry. He's sort of like this 40s or 50s something. He's a burnout. His wife hates him. He's just gone on this massive bender, and while he's drunkenly stumbling through the streets one night, he's abducted by aliens. And
as it happens, yeah.
Yeah, as you do. Like, it's South Africa. I'm sure that's a daily occurrence there. I've seen District 9. I know that happens. Apologies to listeners in South Africa, especially Glenn if you're listening. But yeah, so basically he's abducted by aliens, and this alien creature basically takes hold of his body. But so the alien is sort of just going on like this sort of like joyride in Barry's body, as like he just basically stumbles from like comically, like a ridiculously comic to like disgustingly sort of like grungy set piece from another, one involving a prostitute, which is one of, I guess, will probably be like the most infamous scene of this movie, which I will not talk about because it needs to be seen to be believed. And also just like the scene of him actually getting abducted and the alien overtaking his body has some really sort of darkly comic and like really sort of quite very visceral imagery that like was really interesting to see, but was also like kind of like, what is happening? And like a lot of this movie is sort of like, what is happening? And like, I guess it's all sort of elevated. Again, apologies to South African listeners, but like it's all elevated to this level of ridiculousness because South African accents, I'm not sure if you know, they're really funny. especially like when everything is at this heightened register. But my problem, much like Crazy Samurai Musashi, it builds, like, it just keeps trying to top itself in like how ridiculous it can get, and it just kind of really falls flat after that, and it kind of gets boring after a while, which is unfortunate.
That's a shame. I love a good movie accent. They make everything better. That's a bummer that they couldn't quite put that together.
Yeah. And I'm scared now because I've seen through the Fantasia Discord server and through other critics that have seen this film, the director, like for every critic that's actually reviewed this film, the director has sent each critic a video of the actor playing Barry, a video of him aggressively yelling their name while screaming their name into a camera. So,
oh no! Everyone, look out for Sean.
I'm scared.
Press F for respects for Sean. Oh my god! I hope that doesn't happen to me.
There is genuine, there's a lot of genuinely great sort of what the fuck moments in there, and it would be a great film to see with an audience too. But which is why I think it's sort of a bummer that this film is going to a virtual festival. But I can definitely see this playing well with the sort of Fantasia crowd, and even in the festival, the online festival space, it seems to have done that so far.
It sounds like it'd be a great midnight showing or something like that. Where I know at Sundance where it's just I remember back at Sundance in January where I watched Bad Hair, which is a movie coming out I think in October around Halloween, but that movie was 20% better just because I saw it at midnight and I was tired. But
that perfectly leads us into our next category, which you have said of sort of films that occupy this sort of festival space. What is the most genre-iest compared to according to what your colloquialism there? The most genre-iest film festival of this genre festival.
So we're going with the genre-iest. I can't even say my own category. But basically the film that we felt best exemplifies just the spirit of Fantasia, the wackiness and everything of it. And I chose the Mortuary Collection, which is a horror anthology movie directed by Ryan Spindell. And it seems like a lot of people like it. It's actually 100% on Rotten Tomatoes right now. But obviously that doesn't mean anything, but people do like it. So it's basically, it takes place at a morgue. Obviously, you can tell from the title. But the head of the morgue is played by Clancy Brown. Just great stuff from Clancy Brown.
Mr. Krabs himself.
Yes, exactly. And so the idea of this movie is that he is finishing up on a eulogy that he is having at the morgue, and there's a girl that comes in. She says, "Oh, I saw the help wanted sign out front." And I was like, "Do you guys need any help?" And he's in the most evil, he's very evil. He's got all this makeup on. He looks like the very evil person you would see in a morgue, or a really evil old butler or someone you'd see. He's just very menacing, very Clancy Brown. The voice is great. It's just all great stuff. And so the girl's like, "Yeah, I saw that. I love morgues for some reason." She doesn't say that, but it's she gives off that energy. But she's like, "I would love to help." And he says, "Sure." And so he's looking all menacing and things like that. And they start looking, he starts showing her all the rooms. It's "Oh, this is where all our books are." And she's like, "Wow, this is a crazy collection. What are these books?" And he explains that all these books are stories of real people who died in crazy and specific ways. So then an anthology movie was born. So this movie is I would call it 3.5 different stories, because the first one's pretty cute, where it's 5 minutes long, and it's about an octopus monster that lives behind a mirror in a bathroom. And so a girl basically gets sucked into it, and that's about it. And then you cut from that, and then the girl is that wasn't too great. It's very much she's taking the critic stance of right. That's that wasn't really imaginative and things like that. It's things we've seen before, but it works pretty well.
It sounds like a Treehouse of Horror episode.
Yeah, pretty much. It's kind of fun in that way. And so then after that, Clancy Brown's like, "Oh, I got the stories for you." So they get progressively more crazy and crazy. And this movie all takes the thing that I struggle with anthology movies is cool, you have all these great stories, but how are they really connecting? And I feel a lot of our lesser anthology movies are just a way to put a couple short films together because they didn't know what to do with them. So this movie, it tries to make it a lot about fate and how it's basically everybody gets what's coming to them. Evil does get, like, there's a balance. So some good force counteracts the bad. People who do bad things get what's coming to them. Things like that. So I would say in the end it does work pretty well. All of the stitching to it, because there's a few revelations in the third act where it does end up becoming a little more than just like filler between different anthology stories. But I feel like the best parts are obviously the stories. There's one with Jacob Elordi from Kissing Booth fame. I know who Spencer Henderson
your favorite.
He's just going nuts right on Twitter. You can sense it. He's ready. He's ready to start tweeting. that bit will never die, and honestly, I'm here for it now. But yeah, so of Euphoria and things like that, and he plays in this specific story, he plays just a frat douchebag who is giving out condoms and saying, "Oh, this is to take down." Basically, he says to take down the patriarchy and make you all you women empowered, so you can have sex with us. That's basically what he says. So he brings this girl back, doesn't use protection, and then he gets pregnant. So there's a reversal there, and it's very gruesome. It's incredibly gruesome. This movie has a wicked mean streak to it in every single horror short. It's just really mean, and there's really, really good gore effects to all of these. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff like that. There's another one where a husband is looking after his wife, who is basically like, she's just basically a vegetable at this point. Like, she can't move. She's feeding him, and a evil doctor's like, "Hey, I have these pills for you that you can give her, and they're untraceable." So you can just you can kill her if you'd like. So it's just a really wicked morality play that I really liked. I think the stitching together, everything in the morgue with Clancy Brown is probably the weakest up until the third act, but I thought it was really cool. And the director is Ryan Spindell. He injects a lot of really good, like, Spielbergian kind of whimsy, like horror whimsy in the score. There's some really good, like, old Peter Jackson vibes to this, when he was just doing really grimy, gross movies and not doing Lord of the Rings. So yeah, I really like this movie. I think this inhabits a lot of what Fantasia likes in terms of just really striking imagery. I don't think I'll get a lot of the Jacob Elordi stuff out of my head anytime soon. But yeah, I really like this movie. It's one of my favorites that I've seen.
Can't wait for the Kissing Booth fans to see that. And no, that definitely sounds like I'm surprised that this film wasn't on my radar for all of Fantasia Fest. Like, I really want to see this film now. Like,
it's something.
Yeah, like, I'm similar with you with anthology films. Like, in anthology films, you're always going to get like a couple of really great shorts. There's ones that aren't going to be that great. There's some that are going to be quite terrible. But like, yeah, my biggest issue is if there isn't really much of a thematic undercurrent, or like the framing device that like links them all together is like rather flimsy.
Yeah, I think that part is where I think it waffles a little bit. I think it's better than most, so I give it somewhat of the benefit of the doubt. But yeah, the shorts are really good. And yeah, Jacob Elordi is just doing a lot of stuff in that one short, and just shout out to him.
And it's interesting to see an anthology film all from the same director as well. That's interesting.
Yeah, it's really, really good. So it seems like he really had something on his mind there. But yeah, I really liked him. I really liked it. I think he's someone to watch out for too, because I think he wrote this too. He's kind of the whole mind behind this, and yeah, he's really slick as a director. He's got a lot of cool different things he's doing with the camera. So Ryan Spindell is definitely a guy to look out for.
Well, as for my sort of genre-iest film, I've got two. I'll quickly touch on one because I've already got a review for it on the site. But this film is easily, like, sort of encapsulates what at least I go to genre film festivals for, is just like these just things that you would never see anywhere else. And that is this Estonian stop-motion animation film called The Old Man Movie, which apparently is a feature-length adaptation of like this cult web series from these two Estonian animators. And basic idea: 3 city children are dropped off at their grandfather's place in the countryside. He's a dairy farmer. He has this cow. Like, he's basically a hometown hero. The villagers go absolutely crazy for the milk that the cow makes, but because But because he's a bit old-fashioned, he is not really up to date with in terms of animal ethics, and this cow is rather abused, and it kind of horrifies the children a little bit. So one night, one of the kids lets the cow go free. But as you find out, in this world anyway, I'm not quite sure if it's in real world. Any cow experts, please correct me. But apparently, if a cow is not milked within 24 hours, it will explode. The udder will expand like a balloon, and it will explode like a nuclear bomb.
That's amazing.
So basically, it becomes like a race against the clock for the old man and their grandchildren to try and find this cow before it explodes. But then also, they also have to beat the old milker, who was a victim to a what they call the lactopocalypse in the film. And he was basically right next to the cow when it exploded, and his whole body chemistry has changed now. Like, he's wheelchair bound, and he is basically more milk than man at this point. Like, he says something of like, I bleed buttermilk and cry vanilla ice cream.
That's incredible.
Something ridiculous like that. And this movie is just like bizarre set piece after bizarre set piece. Like, it's just like, you go from like a tree god with like an archway under it, with it like sort of moans every time you drive under it and keeps asking you to drive in and out and in and out. Like, this movie is so crass and so immature, but it's one of those things. The best way I can describe this movie is like A Town Called Panic meets Rick and Morty. That is what this film is.
That sounds great.
And like, there's also like, if you have a scene where your character gets swallowed by a giant bear and then has to use the power of rock and roll to escape its colon, you have my vote. This film is just so fucking bizarre, and like, it tries to have a message. Like, it does have somewhat of an anti-animal abuse message, and like, you know, to be more ethical and have respect for animals. But the way the film inverts that in like the final 5 minutes is just so shocking. Like, you have, again, like with what I said earlier, like with Fried Barry, you have to see it to believe it. But yeah, Old Man Movie is one of my favorites of the festival. It's just so outlandish and so bizarre, and yeah, it's just one of the funniest films I've seen this year.
That sounds amazing. I'm here for all milk puns at all times, so that sounds incredible.
But then the other film that I have here of the sort of this one's kind of at the other end of the spectrum. It's still a decent film, but it's called The Colonist, and this is, I believe, it's a Dutch film. It's directed by, I think, Ivo van Kant, I think is his name. I don't have that with me, unfortunately, but I'm just looking through my notes, my extended notebook that I have for each of these ones. So The Colonist is basically, it's this Dutch film about this journalist, like, I think she's like an advice columnist or like a political columnist or something like that. So after she appears on a talk show, she's meant to sell her book, but then, you know, she goes on there and eventually starts to, you know, express her interest. And, you know, if you're a woman in a public space expressing your interest that people don't agree with, unfortunately, that doesn't work out well for you, which is bullshit, but that's a discussion for another day. But anyway, so what happens here is that she starts getting a whole heap of abuse online. Like, it's really starting to take hold of her personal life. Like, she starts getting death threats. It starts escalating, and like, one day she just snaps and starts to, I think it begins with her next door neighbor. She finds out her next door neighbor, who appears at one point in the movie in blackface. Like, so, and like, like, as soon as you go through this guy's social media presence, it's like, yeah, this guy is like a fucking horrible human being, and like, you know, is like, his Twitter page is fucking horrifying. And like, she kind of gets like, yeah, like, so it was kind of the straw that breaks the camel's back. So like, you know, and she basically starts going after her attackers. Literally.
Oh.
She starts
That's amazing.
fucking killing. She starts tracking down her attackers, like, you know, trying to figure out who they are under their, like, behind their anonymous, like, Twitter profiles, and then track them down, find them, kill them, and take one of their fingers as a trophy.
As one does, of course.
There's not really much more to say about this film. I think I think it just very much fits into like this space of the Fantasia, like, you know, of the sort of genre festival. As a genre piece, I think it's really entertaining and really satisfying, and also really cathartic in that way too. I think the film, I think, kind of overreaches a little bit in terms of like its social commentary, but it's still effective. It's a decent movie, not one of my favorites, but still definitely worth the watch.
I'm surprised. Like, I feel like that idea for a movie would have happened by now. It's kind of crazy
Yeah.
that like it's taken this long. I don't know. It's weird.
Well, I would not be surprised if there is an English language remake, or an
As one
American
does.
remake sometime in the next couple of
I'm
years. That would
I'm
definitely
still
surprise
I'm
me.
still not looking forward to whenever the English remake of The Guilty comes out, and it'll just
Is
be.
that even happening?
I don't know, but I saw the thing whenever that came out. I was like, oh my god, The
Yeah.
Guilty is amazing, and then
Just listen to Bong Joon-ho. Watch it with subtitles, you moron.
yes, I agree. So we'll move on from there. We wanted to touch on, I know both of us really have a documentary that we really like that we're going to talk about in a second, but we wanted to do a little spotlight, a little documentary spotlight. So Sean, what was the movie that you wanted to talk about here?
Now, you didn't see any other documentaries other than the one
I did not. I just saw the one.
Okay.
And it's my favorite movie, so we're talking about it later.
It's mine too, so we'll get to that. And it's actually coming out at the end of this week in the US.
It is. So. I do know that, yeah.
Right, so this film, I'm not sure when this is coming out outside of Fantasia, but this is a film, again, with a great title. And you see this a lot in genre festivals too, like Fantasia. It's a film called The Prophet and the Space Aliens. How aware are you about realism? The religion known as realism.
I have no idea.
So basically, this is from a Israeli filmmaker, a documentary filmmaker named Yoav Shamir, I believe. Apologies if I've mispronounced that. He is actually invited to Okinawa for basically to make a film about the leader of this religion, in inverted commas religion. Because I can't remember exactly the reason why, but apparently, I'm not exactly sure. I don't have that in my notes here. But so he's brought over to make this film about this man Rael, who claims to be a prophet, who was basically like in the 70s was abducted by aliens who said we created the human race and like all of this sort of stuff, and like you are the prophet that does all this stuff. It's actually it would make an interesting double feature with special actors, which we'll talk about later as well. But yeah, so it's basically like this look into this man and into this bizarre religion with some ridiculous beliefs. Like they claim that like they have human cloning technology, and they believe unlike most religions, they believe that human cloning is the only path to eternal life. And yeah, so the belief is that humans were created from the DNA of aliens, so that basically to live eternally, like human cloning, and they believe that they claim they have human cloning technology. But yeah, the documentary, and it's interesting because like I'm always interested in how documentaries and documentarians, directors of documentaries, whether they choose to insert themselves or not insert themselves into the film. Here, he kind of has to, because it's sort of like this journey. So I've seen it done really poorly, but here I think it's done quite well. Because you kind of see the filmmaker kind of gets under the spell of this, and you yourself, like it's really well done, where it's like, you can see like the filmmaker is kind of being manipulated by this very charismatic leader that is Rael. And then you learn more about him. But then like he starts to snap out of it a little bit and being like, I'm starting to realize I'm being manipulated. And he's starting to think like part of me like wants to believe him, but part of me also wants to like expose him for his bullshit. Basically, because like one of the big things around this cult is like sexual freedom. Which and like they have plans of like in I can't remember which one of the there's a country in Africa, I believe they were in, not Senegal, there was one country in Africa that they have like put a sect there in, and to combat against, because sexual freedom and sexual liberation is a big part of this religion. They have plans to like start up like this hospital to for women who have been basically had genital mutilation. Basically, they've started this hospital that can like restore their clitoris, basically, so that they can, once again feel sexual pleasure, which is okay. But then the film delves deeper into it, and there's like really no sort of thing, and then it's like it gets into some really interesting areas, and then you see this man especially like then you learn about like I think there's the Angels of Rael, who like basically it's only the prettiest women in this sect. They can't have sex with anyone else except for either the gods or Rael himself, and you're like, okay, man,
Something's not right here.
I'm starting to call this thing, and like he always dresses in white. Like there's at one point where he's on a beach, he looks like Eminem, like in all white. It's really really funny. But then like the film never takes like this sort of judgmental approach.
Oh, interesting.
And like eventually he does go back to his hometown in France, and like because like he only ever hears about like this glowing sort of talk about him and like how like his teachings have sort of like liberated and like they found salvation with this in realism. But then he goes back to like the small town in France where he grew up, and you found out like he was like a moderately successful musician that burnt out. And then he also had like this car magazine in the 70s which folded, and like it turns out like he was someone that was just like really really obsessed with being famous. And at one point like and this is where the documentary like sort of starts to take the leading of like maybe this is all complete it starts to get more cynical and be like, okay, maybe this is all complete nonsense. Like you get the feeling like that. And but again, the documentary has an open mind. Like there's at one point where he's talking about like his second book where he basically explains like when he met the aliens and they took him to his home planet. They interview one of his old childhood friends, and he was like, yeah, that's in a comic book he borrowed from me back in like 72. So
oh my god.
But then like yeah, it is an interesting film. It's an interesting sort of look into this religion, and like does definitely take a non-judgmental approach, and like it's just a very interesting ride. And like the final lines of the film definitely will stick with you. It's just like whether you like he basically the end of the film, I don't really think it's a spoiler, but like he basically directly says to camera, it's like, even if you're, I understand you're skeptical, but just think to yourself, what if it's true?
It's pretty good.
And yeah, it's a decent thing where it leaves with. And I've rambled on a bit about this. It's probably made no sense, but it's The Prophet and the Space Aliens. Definitely a very compelling documentary that surprisingly takes a non-judgmental, less cynical. Like I as soon as I heard about this, I thought it'd be like a haha gotcha sort of like expose of like this nonsense, but it really isn't.
How do they approach the cloning? Is it just like, oh, we can't show you that, or what is the deal there?
I think with that, it's just like they mention it at the beginning, and it's just like they don't really bring it up that much. Like they say like, oh, apparently there was this big report back in 2002. It's like, we've cloned the first ever human. It's like, great. Is there any evidence of that? No.
Okay, cool. That's funny. Cool. All right. Well, so I guess from there, it's a good segue into both of our best movies of the festival that we've seen, which is also a documentary, which is the great documentary Feels Good Man, which is basically the whole, I guess it's a journey, exploration of Matt Fury, a cartoonist who created the cartoon Pepe, who I assume most people just know from memes and everything like that. But as all things do, he just drew this cartoon based off of his life as like just a fun boys do. Like it's just like a frog peeing in the urinal, things like that. Just a fun little cartoon. And then somewhere down the line in this movie, and the movie goes far in depth on how this takes place, but Pepe was used as a symbol of self-loathing and eventually hatred and just very nasty stuff later on. It starts all on 4chan, and it basically, the documentary shows this really good chronology of how Pepe was a very simple, relaxed, and just a fun little cartoon that you'd read just like on your phone or something like that. And we fast forward to its a symbol of the Anti-Defamation League. It's used by the alt-right to further their claims, and Donald Trump is retweeting everything. It's like, what is happening? But yeah, I think it's and we'll get more into it, but I think it's a really good exploration about also just how people can turn things and just turn them into hate, but also how once a creator makes something and how it totally shifts it and how it totally shifts once the public gets its hands on it. Like I think we see like directors all the time where we're just looking about films where it's like, yes, like this is what I really intended, and then like people view it and they take it within context of their world and everything like that, and it changes totally differently. I think this is like a worst case example of that. I think it's a really good documentary.
I love this movie. It's one of my favorites. It is my favorite of the festival, and probably one of my favorites of the year so far. I absolutely love this film. It's a brilliant case study into how fucking awful the internet is.
It's so true.
Apologies for swearing, but geez.
This is an explicit podcast. Go nuts, sir.
But I'll keep it to that though. But something you didn't mention there is just how much, like, because the first half of this documentary, like, I will say, like, this is by far the scariest film of 2020.
Oh, it's terrifying.
Like, it is
so terrifying.
Like the way this film gets into like how 4chan works and how that operates, and like it's delving into NEET culture, NEET, which stands for no employment, education, or training.
That's right,
and especially the NEET that they interview as well. Like, it's horrifying in all of that sort of stuff. But like, but what this documentary I think does really well is painting a portrait and how all of this carnage and the sort of psychological impact this had on Matt Fury.
Mm-hmm,
like, 'cause
absolutely.
I do think, even though I think the movie does lose a little bit of momentum once like the film becomes sort of solely about him, and like there's his legal battles with like, you know, like this racist children's book using Pepe's
and Alex
name,
Jones
and Alex Jones, yes. It's just like, yeah, he's just become like this spectator to things have just like mutated and just gone so sour and so nuclear so quickly. It's just, he describes it as a garbage world. Like, I think he describes America and the internet as a garbage world at some point.
Yeah, and I feel so bad for him because, like, they talk a lot about this, how he's kind of oblivious to everything that's going on. He's very oblivious to how things are going on at first, where he's not, like, really big on, like, being on the internet at all. Like, he's like, oh, yeah, like, they're doing a thing with my cartoon. Oh, that's interesting. And then it just spirals so far out of control, and he just, like, before he even knows it, like, it's a symbol on that from the Anti-Defamation League, and it is so fascinating. It's really, the first half of this, as you said, is terrifying because we get to just see how things spiral so quickly, and it's like Pepe, like you look, it's a damn frog. Like, it is just go ahead.
He's essentially like the personification of Matt Fury, essentially, at least in its original form. In its original form from the Boys Club comics, absolutely. Like, he's just this guy that just loves hanging out and just like, he's just very laid back. But I think even though the director, Arthur Jones, who has a background in animation, which by the way, the animated sequences in this film
really
I
good.
think are terrific. Yeah, but like, even though like Arthur Jones, the director, he is like good friends with Matt Fury in real life. And he does have this incredible amount of sympathy for his friend and like everything that he's going for. But then again, he also leaves room to kind of be like, but it also leaves open for the interpretation that Matt Fury was also kind of complicit in like the way that Pepe sort of escalated out of control by not really doing anything about it.
Yeah, it's really interesting how it paints later on how, it's already totally out of his control before he's really taking really strong matters to go against it. It is so fascinating, and like, how we talked about how 4chan works and showing like just all these clips of like I think the editing work is so well in this, where they're showing like Donald Trump winning, and then they just have all these little like people on 4chan just going nuts. And I think all that is just so terrifying, and I don't know, it makes me really scared to think about how we took a frog and made it something so sinister.
It is terrifying, but somehow like all of this is able to end on such a sort of hopeful and uplifting note. Like, this film is definitely a roller coaster of emotions, and I just absolutely loved every second of it. Honestly, one of the best documentaries I've seen in quite a while. Yeah,
it's really, and as you said earlier, it comes out on, I think, the 3rd this coming week. I think so. I think
maybe the 4th. Yes.
Yeah, it's one of those. But it's really terrific. I can't recommend it enough. And it does make you feel a little good in the end. We're like, there are some ways to fix this, but
will make you feel good, man. to make a terrible
puns. I'm keeping it in. So yeah,
Yeah,
from
and
there.
I have a review on the
Oh,
site as well if you want to hear more thoughts about it. If you
and
want
it's a
to read more
terrific
thoughts about
review.
that.
It's a terrific review that I edited and loved as I read it. But we'll move on. We're going to do a little bit of we're calling this odds and ends. We're going to do a little bit of grab bag conversation. So, Sean, what's a movie that you haven't been able to cover yet that you want to discuss?
Well, I have seen PVT Chat, but according to the festival, it's only available for capsule reviews, and I am not quite sure if I'm allowed to review it for this podcast. So
I don't either.
I'll hold off. But PVT Private Chat, PVT Chat, or Private Chat, however you want to say it, will be known as the Julia Fox Camgirl movie, and it's actually really good. It's really sort of interesting. I'll just do a very brief. It's this really interesting sort of. I guess exploration into, and very timely as well, into like romance, intimacy, and especially loneliness online and in the age of the internet. And yeah, it's sort of like a raw. Yeah, it's an interesting film, but I don't know if I can say too much more about it. But Special Actors is one that we've both seen.
Yeah, Special Actors, really good movie. So this is the follow-up from Shinichiro Ueda, who did One Cut of the Dead, which I know we both adore. It's a terrific movie.
Yes.
So this is a very interesting movie. It's very, very high concept. So it follows this follows this guy. He's probably like late teens, early 20s. He's trying to be an actor, and he's just not good at it at all. And
Why
the
is
thing
he
with
not good at it?
So there's a thing that happens. So he, much like in Knives Out, we see with Ana de Armas, who just pukes as soon as she starts to lie, things like that. We have a tick here where as soon as he just gets under pressure or excess tension, he just faints immediately. So there's some really good fall scenes in this movie that's really good for comedic effect, and it's used throughout the movie. And I thought terrifically. There was at one point where I thought they were going to kind of forget it for a little bit, but it always comes back around. And I think it's a really good part. But so he just faints every time. He's really nervous. I just really want to give him a hug the whole movie. He's just so good at being nervous. He sees this guy who he later finds out is his brother, who gets into a street fight in the middle of just this area. And he's like, what the hell happened here? And as he learns later, his brother is part of this group called the Special Actors. And so they're real life actors. They got hired to do any type of thing. So there's a good montage in this movie of they are hired to be the terrible people that you find at restaurants who are just complaining about everything, and it turns into this crazy over the top sequence where they're like chasing after the maitre d', and it's really, really funny.
Yeah, because I think the owner of the restaurant was like, I want to test my staff in like situations.
And it's really, really funny. So there's a lot of things like that. So one day a girl comes in their office and says, is it her sister? I think it's her sister. He says her sister now belongs to a cult, and she owns this inn that has been passed down through their family, and she is going to give the cult her inn, so they can use it for just whatever to just improve their reach and make it their headquarters and things like that. So she taps the Special Actors to basically infiltrate the cult and make her sister like keep the inn, keep the cult away from her, make her get her out of the cult. It's all this. It's so quiet. It's so crazy, and it escalates so fast. But yeah, so the rest of the movie is spent with them infiltrating this cult, with hilarity ensuing. And just kind of going all over the place, doing all these crazy things that somehow don't work, but also end up working. It's really, really funny. What did you think of it?
I think it's kind of like a heist movie in that sense. The heist movie, but they're not really stealing anything. I mean, they are actually no, they do try to steal something because there's like a video explaining to like investors of like basically how bullshit the cult actually is, and it's basically like sort of like this pyramid scheme or something. And like they're trying to get like a USB on like out of like a hard drive. And then one of them pretends to be like they come up with this plan where like during one of like their sermonizings or whatever, like they see one of them pretends to be like a journalist like uncovering, and they're like like, oh, she's a journalist, and like try to like just like take her in. Yeah, it's incredibly wacky. It has that same sensibility Ueno brought to One Cut of the Dead. And also, like, he clearly has a love for, I guess, not it. It does. He clearly has a love for filmmaking, because I think that One Cut of the Dead is one of the best films ever made about filmmaking,
I
and like
agree.
he definitely does carry that over here, I guess, to the art of acting as well.
Yeah, he really loves just the artificiality of any like piece of filmmaking. So obviously, with the One Cut of the Dead, we're seeing just this incredible sequence at the beginning. And I don't want to spoil the movie for people who haven't seen it, but do know that it becomes a lot more and it peels the layers back. And this movie does a lot of that as well, where it's a lot of people being fake, but also when they're pretending to be fake, they're pretending to do other things. There's just so many different layers to all of this.
I think also the look of the movie, like the sort of soap opera look, where like almost every single image is like completely overexposed, like light is like saturating like every single image of the film. I think it builds this sort of artifice.
Yeah, I agree. I wouldn't say. I think I definitely like One Cut of the Dead. If we're comparing these two movies, I like One Cut of the Dead a little more. I ultimately found this movie a little more precious in the end. I think it gets so wacky and over the top that I don't know. I feel like it may have lost itself a little bit, but I still really like this movie. I think it's really just really, really funny. I think a lot of the humor is just so over the top in places, and there's some really good buffoonery acting. So they play really good idiots in this movie. Especially the cult leader or the the mute cult leader, who is just really, really good in this movie quite a bit. There's a lot of really good nuggets in here.
Yeah, there's also layers to a lot of the performances as well, because a lot of them are actors playing roles. So,
right. Yeah, there's a lot of that, and it kind of goes back to like, Ueda really loves kind of getting into just really kind of tearing down the artifice of filmmaking. And there was another movie that did that recently, Tesla, which apparently I'm the only one who liked. But
I will see it if it ever gets distribution in Australia. I'll try and see it.
I mean, it's a movie where Thomas Edison and Nikola Tesla have an ice cream cone fight. So, like, I don't really know what else you need from a movie. It's amazing. I think this movie, there's a lot of really good stuff in this movie. I liked it. I think Ueda is officially a director who I'm just going to check out everything he makes. I just think he's just really smart and does a lot of really clever things. I love there's one little bit in here. It's the main character loves watching this really cheesy old TV.
Yes.
It's I think, what is the superhero?
Rescue Man.
Rescue Man. That's it. And it's really hilarious, over the top. People flying on wires and getting flown back with just force fields, but they don't have the budget, so it's just the guy pushing his hands out really hard, and they fly back. It's really, really good, and that has a really good payoff later on. But I really like special actors a lot.
Yeah, I also love the plot where like they're trying to con the con art. Like, it's basically a film about conning the con artists, which I think is really interesting. Like, they try to convince them that the inn is haunted. So
yeah,
and to make
really
the cult
good.
Leave. Yeah,
it's really, really terrific. I also wanted to touch on, so we're switching over here to another movie that I saw called Minor Premise, which is a great idea for a movie. So it's this scientist who is working on his own experiments. Well, he works for a bigger company, but he's really just a man just working on his contraptions in his basement in his home. So he's working on this machine that can extract memories in very clear picture from your brain. And so his idea is that all memories are attached to an emotion. And so what we can do there, when we have all these emotions, is we can isolate different parts of the brain, and then we can use this machine to highlight these certain parts of the brain. So he figures out this formula and says, like, oh, I'm gonna do this experiment on myself, because all crazy scientists in movies do their own experiments. And so he's like, all right, I'm gonna turn up my intellect for an hour and see what happens. So he goes under, and when he wakes up, he actually screwed up where he has 10 different fragments of his brain that are all split apart. And so they take over, they become like the leader for 6 minutes every hour. So for every 6 minutes, it's pure creativity, and then the second one is like pure anxiety, and then it goes back to the default at the end, which is just him by himself. So like there's the different parts, or like he's at one point he's like full libido, so he's just really horny. There's one where he's all euphoria. There's one where he's basically just psychotic. And there's one where he's just very angry as well. So it's him trying to figure out with his assistant how to fix this before basically his brain just splits apart and he dies. And I wish it was a little more than that, because the movie is very bogged down in the mechanics of, oh, like the evil side of me is going to take over in a few seconds. So let's figure this out and don't tell him this thing, so that, and then because they don't have like shared memories. So if you told one version of himself something, like the eighth version won't remember it. So it's a lot of that where it's like, we got to like maneuver all this together. We got to keep away the bad parts of me so they don't get in the way of this. I wish it was more of a deep dive into like the psychology of this person. And because like, I feel like that's a great idea where you're focusing on like a certain part of his brain where it's like, he could be like all of his anxieties are out at the same time. Like, what does this mean for this person? I think there was a chance at a really good character study that I don't think this movie quite leaned on. I also think it's not as outlandish as you would think. Like, you would think if a guy's like full libido, like he'd just be going nuts and just like insane. And it's not quite there. It's a little too muted for my liking in that sense. But I think the main actor is really good. I don't have the name off the top of my head, but I think this movie is a really cool idea, and I really enjoyed watching it. But I wish it was just a little more interested in the deeper ideas that it's kind of scraping up towards. But it kind of just leaves itself as a solid, well crafted and slick genre movie, which is good on some occasions. But I could see in so many situations where like, man, this movie could be really, really good, but it's not quite there. So a little unfortunate, but I still appreciated the movie.
Oh, I'm intrigued by that one, actually. Again, that was another film that wasn't like Mortuary Collection. That wasn't on my radar at all. Like, I don't think this is the first time I'm hearing of this film, actually.
I'm pretty sure. So I think it was one of those where I got an email from PR and they're like, oh, it's Primer meets something else. And I'm like, that sounds interesting. I'll take the bait and watch this movie. And it turned out it was pretty interesting. I think, yeah, it's frustrating because you can, like I said, you can see all where it could be like some transcendent movie, but it doesn't quite get there. But I think there's a lot of interesting stuff in it and it's worth watching.
All right. You haven't seen what the general consensus on this film is? Because it sounds like one that like maybe some people would love, or like, yeah, has it been like, has the consensus sort of met with where you are at the moment, or has it been at either end?
I actually don't know. I think I searched for it and I didn't have many reviews, so I think this is one of the smaller movies at the festival. Let me see if I can look it up real quick. Tell us something that you really like, that you want to talk about.
I think we're almost at our last. I think I'm at my last film, actually. And I have an interview with the director of this film, director Quinn Armstrong of this film. This is a film called Survival Skills, which behind Feels Good Man is my second favorite film of the festival. So what I was surprised, like, I watched this movie based on the premise alone, and also because a friend of mine who I've had on my show, Another Bloody Movie podcast, his short film, Chris Elena is his name, his short film audio guide played at a film festival in San Jose back in March, basically right when the world was starting to end, back in March.
Oh, geez.
And his short played before this film called Survival Skills, and like, he told me about it and I really, really wanted to see it. And as soon as I saw it was playing at Fantasia, I jumped on it. And the reason why is because I heard of this concept. It's basically like a sort of social satire and parody of an 80s police training video.
Oh,
now,
interesting.
If you hear that, like, immediately I'm thinking like, this is going to be somewhere like, this is going to be like veering somewhere to like the Adult Swim sort of like everything is terrible, like Tim and Eric sort of kind of aesthetic, but also type of humor, I find.
Right.
And while it does have that, the way this movie inverts that, like, you kind of feel betrayed. Like, while you're watching it, you kind of feel a little betrayed. But then when the rest of the film happens, like you realize just how genius it is. And as I said, I had an incredible chat with Quinn Armstrong, which I'm gonna hopefully transcribe and put on MovieBabble at some point, and then also put the audio on my podcast feed as well. But basically, there's this new, very naive cop called Jim to the Middletown Police Department. His first call is to a domestic violence case, or not case, but like, call, I guess. And like he's starting to see like the real issues that are happening with it, but then he's also frustrated by the fact that the police, like, he can't do anything about it. Like the sort of system he's in doesn't allow any, like, can't do anything about it. And I'm butchering how I say this, so listen to the interview I do with Quinn. Like, he explains it a lot better in terms of like the thematic sort of stuff in this movie. But what's really interesting about this as well, and like it goes for more serious, of like this cop who's like really trying to do good, but in a system that won't allow him to. And what's really interesting is that the film like will go off in this direction, and it's also got like the narrator, like this all takes place within this sort of training video aesthetic as well. So like it all looks like an 80s VHS tape. But then it will cut back to Stacy Keach, who's basically like the narrator of the film and the narrator of this training video. It's just like, oh, well, that got out. That got off topic quick, didn't it? That got out of hand. And like, he's basically trying to put the movie back on track to like the training video, but it keeps getting diverted by the actual story that's happening. And like, there is that great sort of humor. Like, there's this great thing about like protest that like about like, like it's all very much like steeped in like, I guess like the Reagan era paranoia of like, I guess just like anything that is like un-American, and like, rise of Satanism. Like there's a great moment. There's a great moment where Jim has to come in to, like, he gets a call from like there's kids apparently playing, like he gets a call from someone that says they think that they're like satanic worshippers in like the house next door. They break into the house and it's just kids playing Dungeons and Dragons.
That's really good.
He pulls a gun out on him and says, like, you better get a proper American hobby the next time I come out.
Oh my god.
It is a fascinating film. And yeah, as I said again, my chat with Quinn was amazing. This film really threw me, and is so, like, especially now when, and Quinn talks about this in the interview, like he was incredibly, I guess, what's the word for it? I guess hesitant to to play this movie now, because he said right after he had accepted for Fantasia, that was right around when George Floyd was killed.
Right.
So his immediate reaction was like, fuck, we got to pull the movie. But like, it's really interesting to watch that in light of the recent police brutality that's happened, and how that's really escalated and, gotten this, worldwide attention now. And seeing it through that is really, really interesting, and not at all in a bad way. It definitely will be divisive in that way, but I don't think it's way too complex for me to explain by myself. But like, just see if you can try and watch it. It's a really, really incredible film.
That sounds really good. Do you know what the reception has been for that one? Or have you heard anything from other people?
I think it's been mainly positive, but there have been quite a few voices of dissent towards the film.
Yeah, interesting. I'm sure that's going to be quite the lightning rod. And to circle back with minor premise, according to Rotten Tomatoes, it does not exist.
Oh,
so
really?
That just shows how
you got to get on there.
I know. I got to do it.
You are Rotten Tomatoes approved now. You got to get on there.
Yep. I got to do it. I got to be the first one. Yeah. So my last movie was actually a movie that premiered at Sundance earlier this year. I didn't get a chance to see it there before the world imploded. But that movie is Dinner in America. And it just, I don't quite know how to describe this movie. It's very, very strange. It's just very chaotic. It's very punk. So the first scene of this movie is just very, very bizarre. So we follow Kyle Gallner is the lead character in this movie, or the lead actor in this movie, and you've seen him in things like American Sniper and all these other movies where he's never quite taken like the leap that I expected. I feel like well, I'm not a huge Kyle Gallner head, but I feel like he was in a lot of things around like the early 2010s, and he kind of disappeared for a while. But this
Yeah,
seems like
he was on Veronica Mars quite a
that's
bit
what it
as
was.
well.
Yeah.
Looks like, yeah.
So he's been around. You've seen his face. You know him. You're like, oh, you act in things. You've seen him. But we open in this institution where he's given himself up to medical examination, where he's taking all these pills. He's drooling all over the place. He can't hear. There's another girl that he knows that is doing the same thing, and they're just like flicking their tongues at each other, and it's like the really gross like tongue sound effect that you've heard many times. That
The
like
hereditary thing.
no, it's just like you know it when you know it when you've heard it, where it's just like a little flipper sound. It's really disgusting. And this movie is just hyper edited all over the place, and it has this punk trash techno beat throughout the entire movie. And I don't even know if I use those words correctly because I don't listen to punk music, but that's just it makes sense in my head, those words. So this movie follows this punk rocker, and after him and his friend leave the institution because they leave early because they run amok and they don't get paid their whole amount, so they get mad and leave. The girl says like, hey, you can come over to my place for dinner, and I can blow you afterwards. And he's like, oh, okay. But it's just like very punky and grungy. So they go over to the house, and her family is just like this, like the most despicable, super like ultra like we're white Americans, like they're watching football. Like this movie uses very shocking language. Like at one point he's like they're watching football and he uses the N-word, and it's like very like, oh, you're like, whoa. And the entire movie is like that, where it's using very abrasive language the entire time. So basically the lead character played by Kyle Gallner, he starts making out with the mom because she comes on to him, and then everything runs amok. He cracks open the window, he throws a chair out the window and burns he lights gasoline and burns their front hedges on fire and runs away. So that's the lead of the movie. Very, very strange. And the returning to having dinner with multiple people throughout this movie is a thing that returns over and over again. But the main idea of this movie is it ends up being a romance between the punk rocker and this girl who works at a Pet Zone. It's PetSmart, but they probably didn't earn the rights, so it's Pet Zone. And everyone calls her the R word, and it's very troubling. Like it's like first few times I was like, oh, that's like quite a bit. Like I don't know about that. But so she clearly has some kind of issues, but it's not the overplayed like Forrest Gump or any kind of like the movieifying of special needs. They play it a lot truer, and I think that's actually very respectable of this movie. It's just like she's just like a little quirky, and that's not even like a coded term. She just is a very quirky person. Sometimes she doesn't pick up on things, but they play it very honestly. And it's basically the entire movie is a romance between these two, and it's basically these plucky outsiders are going to find love together, and the movie is always very abrasive, and people are yelling at each other. And when they sit down at dinner, people just yell at people more. They go back and forth. And there's a lot of interesting ideas what this movie is playing, but I think ultimately it sums up to like outsiders are people too, which is just like it's a pretty like I think pretty surface level idea. And it's really frustrating because there's a lot of really cool stuff in this movie where there's some good interactions with, I don't know if you know the actor Griffin Gluck, but he's been in a few things. He was in Big Time Adolescence earlier this year. I think he's a really good young actor, but he's the girl's super uptight brother who in a funny sequence learns that he's adopted. And it's just this whole thing, and it's really funny. And the Kyle Gallner's punk rockers, like you need to chill out. You need to smoke so much weed every single day, and then you return later and he's just like high as hell, just like all the food out on the counter, like he has a girlfriend now, things are great for him. It's really funny because this punk rocker like does these like awful things and like they kind of worked out decently for people. But yeah, the movie is and the thing I forgot to mention was so the punk rocker, he is when he performs on stage, he's known as John Q. No one knows his identity. And the girl has been sending pictures of her masturbating to him in the mail. So, obviously, as one does. So he's getting and he realizes it's her. And then there's a whole thing going on there. And they realize that, they realize who each other are. And they kind of they grow closer together. And it's actually pretty sweet. It's not like the madcap kind of thing you normally see. But yeah, I think this movie, it uses a lot of abrasive language in a way that I don't think works for how surface level a lot of its themes are. And that's, I think a lot of people like this movie coming out of Sundance. I think it's sitting at 100% on Rotten Tomatoes and things like that. And I could kind of see why, because I think it's so energetic and it has like almost like a Napoleon Dynamite sense of humor, where it's just very, very deadpan and a little bizarre. But yeah, it's one of those where it just doesn't sit well with me. And I think it's a little tough to put my finger on it, but I think a lot of it comes back to it's just pretty surface level, and it's manic pixie dream girl with a little bit of from a little bit of a different slant kind of thing. Yeah, it's not very well written, but I think I do like a lot of the style in it. It's such a mixed bag for me. It's one of those where it's like, I love so much in there. There's some really knockout sequences, but there's also some things I just don't really care for in this movie. So it's a weird one, but I would recommend people check it out. I don't know when it's coming to like streaming or if it's waiting for theaters, but it seems like it's a hit with other people, so maybe I'm incorrect. Who knows?
It sounds like it, because just from the description you gave there, I'm not quite sure what this film is meant to be. So is it a comedy?
Yes, it's a very it's a very dark. I would say it's probably a dark comedy, because it's just the languages it uses. It's just very, very colorful, and it is very funny. There's a couple of good scenes in it where it's basically a romantic comedy if the lead is just a wastoid punk rocker who's just very, very antagonistic to everyone he meets. So it's really angry. I thought it was a little obnoxious at times, just because it's just like the editing is so in your face too. There's a lot of like snap zooms of the things, and like just the editing tricks where I was like, okay, I see what you're doing, movie. I need you to like relax. Like, can you go like 5% down? That would be great. But yeah, I don't know. I think this is one of those where I think a movie developing a cult following is something that people kind of divert to so easily now, where it's like, it's the same thing as when people call a movie gritty. It's like, that's like the only way that people know how to describe a movie. But I do think this will develop some kind of cult audience, because it is so in your face and strange that some people will say like, oh, this speaks to me in some kind of way. So in that sense, I think it could be pretty successful down the road, but it didn't really work for me.
Yeah, sounds like the vulgar tourists will be all over this.
Probably. Or I don't know. It's a really just straightforward romantic comedy in that sense when you take away like the punk stuff of it. So I was like, okay, it's using all of this, it's using this language, it's very in your face. Like, what is the other shoe going to drop? And it really doesn't.
Yeah. It sounds like it's trying to be edgy.
Yeah, it's edgy for the sake of being edgy. Kyle Gallner has this line at one point where it's like, he's talking about a band they're going to open for, and he calls them fucking posers. And he really sells it, but you're like, oh man, like even that line itself is just being a poser, you know? So yeah, it's trying to be edgy, and I don't think that sentimentality is really working for it. So yeah, I think some people might like it. It's just, yeah, it's not for me.
All right. That's everything, I think.
Yeah. You have any closing thoughts? I guess thank you, Fantasia.
Yeah, Fantasia was awesome. Like online film festivals, I'm guessing aren't going to be the norm. Like this is just like a temporary solution for, while the world's on fire at the moment. But like, if this was to happen again, like even now, like I would consider going all the way to Montreal for this festival. This was awesome. Like, thank you, Fantasia, for giving us this opportunity.
I agree. I have to talk to my official Canadian correspondent, Brennan Dubé, and see what he's up to. It's up in Canada.
How come you didn't cover the festival with us?
Brennan. I love you, Brennan. But yeah, that about wraps it up for us. So thank you again to Fantasia for all you've done for us. We really appreciate it. And
thank you.
Until next time, you can check out all our content on MovieBabble.com and everywhere on social media, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, wherever. So thank you everyone for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.